Hello, my name is Joshua Williams. I am a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University, and I am presenting work with my advisor, Kolter, on a Bayesian model of cash bail decisions. This talk will be split into 4 sections. In the first, I will detail what is cash bail and what are the implications of its use. Second, I will address the problem that our work is looking at, namely the inframarginality problem that arises when we evaluate outcomes of decision-making processes. Third, I will go into how we are modeling the cash bail decision-making process. And then finally, I'll talk about our results. To begin, when an individual is arrested, a judge will assign conditions for which a defendant may be released pre-trial, which is commonly known as bail. These conditions may include not being able to travel outside of the state and to appear at every court date. Of the different types of bail that the presiding authority can choose from, cash bail is the only bail type that can hold a defendant in jail without a justifiable reason. Cash bail requires an upfront payment in order to be released, and if a defendant abides by all other conditions of their release, this money will be returned at the conclusion of the trial. On the other hand, if a defendant cannot afford their bail, they are held in jail until their trial is concluded. As a result of the use of cash bail, in 2019, 81% of the county jail in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania had not been convicted. And in that same year, 95% of the county jail's population growth was due to defendants who had not been convicted of any offense. The American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania tracked the population of the county jail over a year and a half, and although the incarcerated population decreased throughout the year, within a 6-month period it returned to its previous levels, again as a result of this unconvicted population. But the state has passed laws dictating that magistrates should prioritize releasing defendants without conditions, also known as release on recognizance or ROR. But this release is predicated on a magistrate's belief that a defendant is not a risk, and this may be a flight risk or a risk to others. Yet based on the proportion of defendants released without conditions, magistrates believe that 60% of defendants are such a risk. Moreover, state law also dictates that if a magistrate chooses to assign cash bail, then they must investigate the defendant's financial ability in order to determine a reasonable bail amount. But if the bail amount decided was reasonable, then the county jail wouldn't be filled with defendants who couldn't afford their bail. And by setting unaffordable cash bail and detaining defendants pre-trial, a number of long-term effects have emerged. Holding defendants in jail before their trial increases the chances of receiving a harsher sentence if convicted. It increases the chance of receiving a mandatory minimum sentence if convicted. It increases the chance of having no income over the next 2 years. It increases the chance of being rearrested over the next 2 years. And finally, being held pre-trial increases the chance of pleading guilty, even if innocent, because a guilty plea is often the fastest way to go home. These long-term effects fall especially heavy on the shoulders of people of color. Across Pennsylvania, judges are more likely to assign cash bail to Black defendants than white defendants, and by extension, hold Black defendants in jail more often than their white counterparts before their trial. Even after controlling for the offense type, magistrates assign cash bail for the same crime differently for Black and white defendants in 20% of cases. Outside of Pennsylvania, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has found that courts in Harris County, Texas, had been assigning cash bail to poor defendants specifically to ensure that these defendants would be jailed. These disparities have been found as a result of innumerable analyses that have come to the same conclusions. And in this work, we again investigate this disparity, but we seek to answer the question of, if magistrates are following state law when assigning cash bail, why do they still assign cash bail to some groups more than others? Next, we will begin looking at the inframarginality problem when evaluating outcomes from data. Most prior quantitative analyses of cash bail disparities investigate the correlations among outcomes of the data. For example, how likely are defendants of one group to receive cash bail as opposed to another? But these analyses are susceptible to the problem of inframarginality. The data that we observe can only speak to the average outcome for groups. If we don't know the marginal distribution of these outcomes, we don't know how they are associated with the decision rules that a magistrate may use. To give a clearer picture, let's say we have 2 groups of people, the red group and the blue group. These plots represent the marginal probability of failing to appear for a court date. The vertical lines represent a judge's decision-making threshold, where they assign cash bail to everyone whose probability of failing to appear for the court date is above that threshold. On both plots, 55% of the red group is assigned cash bail because 55% of the distribution lies above the threshold. And in the blue group, 35% are assigned cash bail for the same reason. And of those assigned cash bail in both plots, 31% of the red group fails to appear, while 34% of the blue group fails to appear for their court date. And this comes as a result of the expectation above the threshold being 31% and 34% respectively. On the left, a judge sets a threshold for red defendants that is lower than the threshold for defendants in the blue group. This can be interpreted as bias against the red group, because not only is a judge going to assign cash bail to red defendants while not assigning cash bail to equal blue defendants, they also assign cash bail to significantly more red defendants, and these red defendants who are assigned cash bail are still more likely to appear at all court dates than the blue defendants. And on the right, we have the exact same statistics as on the left, where a judge assigns cash bail to more red defendants, and red defendants are more likely to be compliant with their release conditions. But here, a judge is setting the exact same threshold for both groups. The judge assigns cash bail equally to everyone, and the difference that we observe is a result of the red group having a higher probability of failing to appear as a whole. The inframarginality problem tells us that if we only have a table of data that says who is assigned cash bail and who fails to appear, raw statistics alone cannot differentiate between these two cases, and we can claim bias when there is none, or we can claim there is no bias in decisions when decisions are in fact biased. Here, we detail how our model works and exactly what we are looking for. Current approaches to overcoming inframarginality involves estimating both the marginal distribution of outcomes and the decision threshold using Bayesian estimation. We take a similar approach via a cost model that tells us how much emphasis a magistrate places on some outcomes over others. So first, we look at the determinants of pretrial release. When a defendant appears before a magistrate, the magistrate will first ask, 1, how likely is this defendant to appear for the court date if given cash bail, and how likely are they to appear for the court date if given another bail type? This takes the form of a logistic regression, where one of the regression variables is an indicator of whether cash bail was assigned. Because cash bail is meant to be the strongest deterrent against pretrial failure, the probability of failing to appear is always lower for those who receive cash bail. The second question a magistrate will ask is how likely a defendant is to post bail if this magistrate assigns cash bail. This takes the form of a logistic regression as well. We assume that if a magistrate believes the chances of failing to appear is too high, and that the defendant is likely to afford bail, they will opt to use cash bail. The question then becomes, how do we model this belief if the chances of failing to appear or affording bail is too high? We give each magistrate two variables, tau1 and tau2, that represent this belief. These taus represent the cost that society pays if an individual fails to appear for a court date, and the cost if a defendant is detained pre-trial. As tau1 increases, a magistrate believes that the mere possibility that an individual fails to appear for the court date is far too great a risk, and they will opt to release in cash bail. As tau2 decreases, a magistrate believes the cost of detaining an individual pre-trial is low, hence they will opt to release on cash bail because it doesn't matter to the magistrate whether the defendant can afford bail. In this model, bias arises as a result of both of these parameters. If tau1 for some specific magistrate is higher for one group than another, then this magistrate is more focused on ensuring that the first group appears at their court date and will be more willing to detain than pre-trial to do so. These beliefs are then composed with the probability of each outcome to determine the cost of setting cash bail. If a magistrate sets cash bail for a defendant, the cost paid by society may be high if there is a high probability that the defendant fails to appear, and the cost to society is high if a defendant has a high probability of being unable to afford their bail. Similarly, the cost for not setting cash bail is likely to be high if a defendant is more likely to fail to appear without cash bail. And if cash bail is not assigned, individuals are guaranteed to post and be released pre-trial, so we disregard the cost if an individual does not post bail here. Our model assumes that magistrates act rationally and will always choose the option that will minimize this abstract societal cost. We can then finalize this cost model by looking at this inequality, where magistrates choose the option that minimizes the societal cost. With a little bit of simplification, we get the final equation, where we want to assign cash bail if this equation is greater than 0. Here, the ratio of tau1 and tau2 become a single variable of interest, tau. This ratio tau allows the model to be identifiable as a latent variable model with a single variable. As tau increases, a magistrate places higher emphasis on ensuring that a defendant shows up to their court date by any means, and places less emphasis on the law's requirement that a defendant be set a reasonable cash bail. Higher taus imply a higher likelihood of assigning cash bail. To further illustrate this, we can plot out the odds of setting cash bail for a fixed tau and some fixed probability for affording bail. With a relatively low tau of 4, most of the graph is below the 0 line, so most defendants will have a low probability of receiving cash bail. When the odds of failing to appear are low, a judge will not assign cash bail and will release with another type of bail. But as the odds of failing to appear increase, we hit a point where judges are willing to assign cash bail, as the cost of assigning cash bail is now lower than that of not assigning cash bail. However, as the chance of failing to appear further increases, the probability of being assigned cash bail decreases again, not because the defendant may be released, but because their odds of pretrial failure is too high and their bail is denied altogether. As tau increases, defendants with lower chances of missing a court date are now assigned cash bail. This blue cash bail group gets larger and larger. As tau continues to increase, more and more defendants who are very likely to appear at their court date and comply with all release conditions are given cash bail and possibly held in jail until their trial. We then fit this random variable into a larger generative model. I'm not going to spend much time here. For those interested, our paper has complete details on how we set things up. But we create a model of how the outcome data is generated and use Bayesian estimation to fit the parameters with our data. This model on the screen focuses on race, but we allow the possibility for different groups to have different probabilities of failing to appear, shown by this bubble here. And every magistrate has a unique tau that determines how likely they are to assign cash bail to members of this group. They then assign cash bail based on the previously mentioned model for every unique individual. Finally, we'll start going through the data that we used for this analysis and what results we found. We spent several months scraping 85,751 court records from Allegheny County and Philadelphia County from 2016 to 2019. The Pennsylvania judiciary provides open access to all court records in a JSON file that describes the specific case and a PDF that details an individual's entire court history. We parsed the PDF and reformatted its contents into a JSON file and then concatenated the two to create a complete history for a case. Additionally, we used the defendant's zip code in order to mitigate confounders by including census-level information, such as median income for their zip code. We extracted the set of features in the table here, and in conversations with members of the American Civil Liberties Union of Pennsylvania, we anonymized this data in order to ensure that no specific record can be linked to an instance within our dataset. For those interested, our data is available at the following GitHub link. And within this dataset, we get demographic data, prior criminal history information, offense information from the current case, which magistrate set bail, the outcomes for the chosen type of bail, and these census-level confounders that I previously mentioned. Now we estimate the variable tau for Black defendants and white defendants over the 50 most common magistrates in the dataset. We found that these magistrates uniformly have a higher tau for Black defendants than white defendants, which tells us that magistrates are less concerned with ensuring cash bail is affordable for Black defendants and more likely to assign cash bail to Black defendants than an equal white defendant. Additionally, among some magistrates, tau is less than 1 for white defendants, which tells us that these magistrates are more focused on ensuring pretrial release for white defendants, even when they have a comparatively large chance of failing to appear for a court date. No magistrate has a tau less than 1 for Black defendants. Similarly, we compare tau for men and women over the same set of magistrates. We find that more so for different sexes than different races, magistrates uniformly have a higher tau for men than women. While this is more stark than when comparing individuals of different races, it may be more understandable for reasons such as childcare, but this analysis gives a new place to start when investigating why we see this disparity. Here too, we see that nearly every magistrate prioritizes ensuring women can be released pre-trial, even if they have a relatively high failure to appear probability. We validate our model by looking for groups that we expect to have a significant disparity in treatment, and see if the model captures this treatment. We choose to compare defendants with felony offenses and misdemeanor offenses. And as we expect, defendants with felony offenses are much more likely to be given cash bail over a defendant with a misdemeanor offense. Moreover, many magistrates prioritize ensuring defendants with misdemeanor offenses are released pre-trial, given by the magistrates having a tau of less than 1. As an additional validation step, we compare tau among seasons, as we don't expect bail decisions to change with the season. For each comparison, spring, summer, fall, and winter, we find no significant difference in treatment over each season. We include additional validation tests within our model, and we find that our model also captures a magistrate's true rate of cash bail assignment in the majority of cases. only struggling for those magistrates who rarely use cash bail. These additional validation tests can be seen within our full paper. To summarize our work, we have created a model of cash bail decisions that seeks to estimate a magistrate's underlying reasons for assigning cash bail to some defendants over others. This analysis is in line with a litany of other work that shows that magistrates are uniformly more likely to assign cash bail to black defendants over white defendants, and provide an approach that may lead to more actionable recourse in addressing these disparities. This work still includes areas that can be improved, such as finding additional indicators of pretrial failure that are not based around failure to appear. We go into more detail in our full paper, but it should be noted that whether a defendant fails to appear is a very noisy indicator of whether that defendant violated their release conditions. For example, judges typically do not revoke bail if a defendant was ill or had another justifiable reason for their absence. Secondly, it may be worthwhile to explicitly include the requirement that judges consider other types of bail before choosing cash bail as part of this model, as it may be possible to infer more information about the system by considering all of the options available to a judge, rather than the binary case of cash bail and no cash bail. Finally, it may be worthwhile to flip the script and analyze decisions based on a magistrate's characteristics, rather than the defendant's characteristics. In Pennsylvania, law degrees are not required to be a magisterial district judge, so magistrates with and without law degrees may act differently. By comparing the backgrounds of magistrates, we may find some new ideas for why these disparities exist. And thank you very much for listening.